What does it mean when a show made for children contains something that children aren't allowed to see? I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's not a trick question. SpongeBob SquarePants, the most successful animated series Nickelodeon has ever produced. A show that has been running since May 1st, 1999. A show created by a marine biology teacher named Steven Hillenberg, who just wanted kids to care about the ocean. Has episodes that Nickelodeon decided you shouldn't be allowed to watch. Not because they were poorly made, not because they got bad ratings, but because somewhere along the line, someone at the network looked at these 11-minute cartoons about a sponge who lives in a pineapple and said, this one goes too far. And the thing that's been eating at me, the reason I wanted to make this video, is that the story of SpongeBob's banned and censored episodes isn't just a list of naughty jokes that slipped past standards and practices. It's a map. It's a map of how our culture has changed, how the line between acceptable and unacceptable has shifted under our feet, and how a cartoon that was designed to be absurd and boundary-pushing from day one eventually ran headfirst into a world that didn't have the same sense of humor it had in 2001. And there's something genuinely fascinating about tracing that line, about pulling apart the layers of why certain episodes got pulled, what they actually contain, and what it says about Nickelodeon, about us as an audience, and about SpongeBob itself. Tonight, we're going through all of it. Every banned episode, every censored scene, every cut moment that most people have never seen. And I promise you, by the time we're done, you're going to look at this show completely differently. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable, because we're going to be here for a while. And if you haven't subscribed, it really does help us keep making these for you. All right, let's start with the obvious one. There's a scene in SpongeBob SquarePants that aired on Nickelodeon on January 24th, 2003, Season 3, Episode 15B. And for 15 years, nobody thought twice about it. The episode is called Midlife Crustation, and here's the setup. Mr. Krabs wakes up one morning feeling old. His alarm clock plays a song that reminds him he's getting older. He can barely drag himself out of his hammock, and when he asks Pearl if she thinks he's old, she just says yes. And the way Clancy Brown delivers that growing frustration, that simmering desperation to feel young again, it's one of those performances where you can tell the actor understood exactly what this episode was doing. Because this isn't just a silly cartoon about a crab having a bad day. This is an episode about the terror of irrelevance, about waking up one morning and realizing that the world has moved on without you. So Mr. Krabs overhears a customer at the Krusty Krab comparing him to an old, dried-out Krabby Patty. And that's the final straw. He asks SpongeBob and Patrick if he can join them on their big night out. And here's where the episode becomes genuinely brilliant, because SpongeBob and Patrick's idea of a wild night involves going to the laundromat to watch the clothes spin, visiting a dentist, and playing in an arcade full of little kids. Mr. Krabs is miserable. He's surrounded by the thing he's chasing, youth. But it looks nothing like what he imagined. And if you're watching this as an adult, that hits in a way it absolutely does not when you're 8 years old. The comedy comes from the gap between expectation and reality, and the sadness underneath it is real. But then Patrick says two words that changed everything: panty raid. And look, I know how it sounds in 2026, but you have to understand the context of when this aired. This was Season 3 SpongeBob. This was the golden age. The writer's room included C.H. Greenblatt and Kaz, two people who understood exactly how to walk the line between adult humor and kid-appropriate content. The panty raid scene is played as the punchline to everything that came before it. After a night of the most boring, childish activities imaginable, the one thing that finally makes Mr. Krabs feel young is this absurd, transgressive act. And the kicker, the real joke, is that they break into Mr. Krabs' own mother's house. They're stealing his mom's underwear. The scene ends with Mama Krabs catching them, grounding Mr. Krabs, and sending him to his childhood bedroom. The punchline isn't that the panty raid was cool. The punchline is that Mr. Krabs is a child pretending to be an adult, pretending to be young again, and the universe punishes him for it. For 15 years, this episode aired in regular rotation. It was on DVD box sets. It was on streaming platforms. It was considered a solid Season 3 episode. TV Guide ranked it as the 79th best SpongeBob episode in a 2019 list of the top 100. And then, in 2018, Nickelodeon quietly pulled it. No announcement. No press release. It just disappeared from the schedule. When IGN asked a Nickelodeon representative about it in March 2021, they were told the episode was removed, following a standards review in which we determined some story elements were not kid-appropriate. And then it was pulled from Paramount Plus entirely. Amazon Prime Video followed. It became, for all practical purposes, one of the only SpongeBob episodes you could not legally watch on any major streaming platform. The only place you could still buy it digitally was as part of an iTunes collection called From the Beginning, Part 2. I've been digging into the timeline of this, and here's what's interesting to me. The episode was pulled from TV rotation in 2018. That's the same year the hashtag #MeToo movement was at its peak. Multiple outlets have drawn a direct line between the cultural reckoning around consent and harassment and Nickelodeon's decision to remove an episode that features characters breaking into a woman's home to steal her underwear. And I get it, I do. If you strip away all context and just describe the plot, 3 male characters sneak into a woman's house at night to steal her underwear, it sounds bad. It sounds like something you wouldn't want kids imitating. But here's where I start pulling at the threads. Because SpongeBob SquarePants has never been a show that exists in a vacuum. It's a show that has always operated on layers, and the surface level description of midlife crustation doesn't capture what the episode is actually doing. The entire joke is that the panty raid is pathetic. It's not glorified. It's not presented as something to aspire to. It's the final desperate act of a man who has run out of ways to feel alive, and the universe immediately smacks him down for it. The moral of the episode is that chasing youth through increasingly absurd and inappropriate behavior leads to humiliation. That's not a dangerous message. That's the most conventional moral you could ask for. And yet, it got pulled. And I think the reason it got pulled has less to do with the content of the episode and more to do with the way we've started processing content in the post-2018 world. We've moved from asking, what does this scene mean in context, to asking, what does this scene look like out of context? And those are fundamentally different questions. I actually went back and looked at the Paramount Plus situation more closely, and there's a detail that I think is wild. In July 2023, Midlife Crustation briefly reappeared on Paramount Plus through Amazon Prime Video. Fans noticed it. Articles were written about it. People were excited. And then Paramount pulled it again within days. A spokesperson told IGN, and this is a direct quote from Paramount, that it was a technical error, and the episode was inadvertently posted for a brief period. A technical error. An episode that aired for 15 years on one of the most successful animated shows in television history was accidentally made available to the public, and the company treated it like a security breach. Think about that for a second. Okay, but here's where it gets more complicated, because Midlife Crustation wasn't the only episode to disappear, and the next one on the list reveals something completely different about how Nickelodeon makes these decisions. Quarantined Crab, Season 12, Episode 263B, paired with Who Are Zoo. And the story behind this episode is one of the strangest production coincidences in SpongeBob history. The episode was written and produced in 2019. It was boarded by Brian Moranti and directed by Dave Cunningham. The plot is simple. A health inspector walks into the Krusty Krab, scans the room, and declares that someone inside has a disease called the clam flu. The restaurant goes into quarantine. Everyone's locked inside. Paranoia takes over. Mr. Krabs starts throwing people into the freezer one by one, based on the flimsiest evidence. SpongeBob sneezes because of pepper. Squidward scratches his arm. Mrs. Puff yawns. Pearl mentions having leftover money. It's a satire of mob mentality, of how fear turns ordinary people into tyrants. And then, in late 2019, a novel coronavirus was detected in Wuhan, China. By early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic had spread across the globe, and Nickelodeon was sitting on a finished, fully animated SpongeBob episode about a contagious disease causing quarantine and mass panic. The episode had already aired internationally. France got it on May 6th, 2020, but in the United States, it was shelved. Nickelodeon pulled it due to sensitivities surrounding the global, real-world pandemic. And honestly, I think that decision made sense at the time. When hundreds of thousands of people are dying from a respiratory illness, airing a cartoon that plays quarantine for laughs is a bad look, even if the episode was written years before anyone knew what COVID was. But here's the thing that kept nagging at me as I was researching this. Quarantined Crab eventually did air. It premiered in the United States on April 29th, 2022, making it the final season 12 episode to broadcast. It came back to Paramount Plus in 2023. You can watch it now. So this wasn't a permanent ban. This was a timing issue. Nickelodeon looked at the cultural moment and said, "Not right now." And then, when the moment passed, the episode came back. Compare that to Midlife Crustation, which, as far as we can tell, is still not available on major streaming platforms. One episode was banned because of what was happening in the world. The other was banned because of what was happening in our heads. And I think that distinction matters more than people realize. But we're still on the surface. Because when you start digging into SpongeBob's history of censorship, you realize that the show has been fighting this battle since the very beginning. And some of the earliest examples are the ones that fascinate me the most, because they reveal something about the DNA of the show itself, about what Steven Hillenberg was trying to do, and how Nickelodeon has always been uneasy about it. Let me take you back to September 21st, 2001, Season 2, Episode 18A, Sailor Mouth. 10 days after 9/11, Nickelodeon aired an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants in which the main character learns a swear word. I mean, the timing alone is remarkable, but the episode itself is one of the most audacious things the show ever attempted. Here's the setup. SpongeBob is taking out the trash behind the Krusty Krab, and he reads some graffiti on the dumpster. One of the messages reads, "Krabs is a," and the final word is censored with a dolphin chirp. SpongeBob doesn't know what the word means, so he asks Patrick, who tells him it's a sentence enhancer, something you use when you want to talk fancy, and then they just start using it everywhere, in every sentence, at the Krusty Krab, over the intercom. The customers flee in horror. Mr. Krabs has to sit them down and explain that this is bad word number 11, and that there are 13 bad words total that should never be spoken. Squidward asks if he means 7, a reference to George Carlin's famous 7 words you can never say on television routine. And Mr. Krabs says, "Not if you're a sailor." Okay, so here's what I need you to understand about this episode, because it's the key to understanding everything else we're going to talk about tonight. The voice actors, Tom Kenny, Bill Fagerbakke, Roger Bumpass, were actually swearing during recording. This isn't a rumor. Tom Kenny confirmed it at a 2016 Connecticon panel. The original script called for them to improvise fake profanities that would be censored later, but it was too difficult and time-consuming. So Steven Hillenberg gave them permission to actually curse, knowing the audio would always be covered by the dolphin chirps and foghorn blasts. There is an uncensored cut of Sailor Mouth out there somewhere. Kenny has said the public will never be allowed to hear it ever. Roger Bumpass confirmed at the 2021 Los Angeles Comic-Con that the studio would routinely archive all takes, including the unedited ones. And in a 2024 Q&A with the Art of SpongeBob Discord server, Paul Tibbitt, one of the episode's writers, revealed he once owned a VHS copy of the uncensored version, but doesn't know where it is now. I've rewatched this episode probably 6 times putting this together, and it hits different every time. Because what Hillenberg and the writers were doing here wasn't just making a crude joke. They were satirizing the entire concept of profanity. The episode's real message is that words only have power because we agree to give them power. SpongeBob and Patrick don't understand why the word is bad. They're just making sounds with their mouths, and the adults around them react with disproportionate horror, which is itself the joke. The episode is about the absurdity of linguistic taboos. It's philosophically sophisticated content delivered through the medium of a cartoon sponge saying a dolphin noise. The Parents Television Council didn't see it that way. In a 2006 report called Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, the PTC cited a 2005 rebroadcast of Sailor Mouth as evidence that profanity in children's programming was on the rise. They accused the episode of being an implicit attempt to promote and satirize use of profanity among children. And here's the irony. During the original 2001 to 2002 season, when Sailor Mouth first aired, the PTC named SpongeBob SquarePants one of the best programs on cable television. Nickelodeon's response was sharp. They told the press, "It's sad and a little desperate that they stooped to literally putting profane language in the mouths of our characters to make a point." Richard Huff of the New York Daily News criticized the PTC report for misinterpreting the episode's intent. Sailor Mouth was never banned. It was never pulled from rotation. It's still available on every streaming platform, every DVD box set, every digital marketplace. And I think the reason is that the episode works. The moral is clear. SpongeBob learns not to swear. Mr. Krabs gets punished for his hypocrisy. His own sailor mouth is worse than anything the kids said. Mama Krabs makes them all paint her house. The lesson lands. But the creative director Derek Dryman's original inspiration for the episode, getting in trouble for saying the F word in front of his mother, never stops being the beating heart of the thing. Every kid watching knows exactly what's happening. The dolphin noise is just covering what they already know. And that's the tension that runs through all of SpongeBob's controversial content. The show was always designed to operate on two levels. Steven Hillenberg came from Rocko's Modern Life, a Nickelodeon show that was legendary for its double entendres and hidden adult jokes. He hired writers who understood that the best children's entertainment doesn't talk down to its audience. And the result was a show that could make a 5-year-old laugh at a funny noise, and make a 25-year-old laugh at what the funny noise was hiding. But here's where things get darker. Because the next episode I want to talk about isn't just controversial, it's one of the few episodes in SpongeBob history where the creators themselves have admitted something went wrong. Just One Bite. Season 3, Episode 43. A. First aired on October 5th, 2001. And if that date sounds familiar, it should. It was less than a month after the September 11th attacks. The episode itself is a classic. Squidward has never eaten a Krabby Patty. SpongeBob is horrified. And over the course of 11 minutes, Squidward goes from dismissing the sandwich to developing a full-blown addiction. He eats a half-eaten patty out of the trash. He has a dream where a giant Krabby Patty is his wife. He breaks into the Krusty Krab at 3 in the morning. And in the end, he eats so many Krabby Patties that they go straight to his thighs and he literally explodes. But in the original airing, the version that aired during Nickelodeon's Totally Twisted Telly event on October 5th, there was a scene that has since been cut from every subsequent broadcast, every DVD release, every streaming version, and every digital purchase. Here's what happened. Squidward breaks into the Krusty Krab at night. He reaches the front door and notices a bucket hanging above it. He assumes it's water. It's not. It's gasoline. He kicks the door open, spilling the gas. A robotic arm drops a lit match. Explosion. Squidward stumbles into the kitchen, charred and screaming, and then it happens again. A second bucket of gasoline, a second match, a second explosion. The scene was cut from reruns as early as January 2002, reportedly just 3 months after its original airing. Reports suggest it may have survived until around 2005 in some broadcasts, and some international dubs recorded in the early 2000s have the scene intact. You can still see it on certain South Korean, Serbian, and Bulgarian broadcasts. Canadian television aired it for years on YTV, but in the United States and United Kingdom, it's gone. Now, the official reason was never announced by Nickelodeon, but the most widely accepted explanation has 2 parts. First, the episode aired on October 5th, 2001, 24 days after 9/11, and in the months following the attacks, networks across the board were pulling or censoring content that featured explosions, fire, and destruction. It was a blanket policy. Second, and more practically, there was genuine concern that children might try to imitate the scene, that a kid might find gasoline and matches and try to recreate the security system. I actually have a theory about this that I've never heard anyone else bring up. I think the reason this scene has never been restored, not on DVD, not on streaming, not on any official release, isn't just about the 9/11 sensitivity or the imitation risk. I think it's because the scene was Squidward torture at its most extreme, and Nickelodeon made a creative decision that it crossed the line from comedy into cruelty. The gasoline scene isn't funny the way SpongeBob torture usually is. It's visceral. It's a character being set on fire twice while screaming. And in a show that would increasingly struggle with the balance between Squidward suffers comedy and genuine meanness, this scene may have been the first casualty of that tension. The fan community has essentially turned this into SpongeBob's first piece of significant lost media, or rather, censored media. There was even a Change.org petition asking Nickelodeon to restore the scene, pointing out the apparent hypocrisy of allowing the infamous toenail scene in House Fancy, Season 6, Episode 1A, where Squidward rips off his entire toenail while moving a couch, while keeping the gasoline explosions locked away. And honestly, that's a fair point. The toenail scene is, by any objective measure, more disturbing than the gasoline scene. But one aired long enough ago that it got grandfathered in, while the other hit the chopping block within months. Here's the thing about all of this. About midlife crustation, and quarantined crab, and Sailor Mouth, and Just One Bite. Each one was a different kind of problem. One was a content problem that emerged years after the fact. One was a timing problem, one was a perception problem, and one was a violence problem. But they all point to the same underlying question. Who decides what's too much for SpongeBob? Because the answer has changed. In the early 2000s, the answer was Steven Hillenberg. He was the showrunner for seasons 1 through 3. He came from Rocko's Modern Life, a show that was openly designed to push boundaries. He hired people like Derek Dreiman, Tim Hill, and Nick Jennings, people who understood that the best comedy lives in the space between what you're allowed to say and what you actually mean. Hillenberg was a marine biologist who taught at the Orange County Marine Institute before enrolling at CalArts in 1989. He studied under Jules Engel, the founding director of the experimental animation program, whom he considered his art dad. His sensibility was always rooted in the idea that the ocean is beautiful, weird, and slightly terrifying, and that the best way to get kids to care about it was to make them laugh. After the SpongeBob SquarePants movie in 2004, which Hillenberg intended as the series finale, he stepped back from day-to-day operations. He handed the showrunner role to Paul Tibbitt and stayed on as an executive producer, reviewing episodes but no longer driving them. And this is where the show's relationship with controversy started to shift. Because the guardrails that Hillenberg had built, his instinct for when a joke was transgressive in a smart way versus when it was just mean, weren't there in the same way. And that brings me to the episode that might be the most controversial SpongeBob has ever produced. Not because it was banned, but because a lot of people think it should have been. One Course Meal, Season 7, Episode 11, aired March 25th, 2010. Written by Casey Alexander, Zeus Curvis, and Mr. Lawrence, the voice of Plankton. And I need you to think about what just happened, because I keep coming back to this point. Mr. Lawrence co-wrote an episode in which his own character is psychologically tortured to the point of attempting to end his own life. Here's the setup. Plankton tries another scheme to steal the Krabby Patty formula, but Pearl accidentally wanders into the kitchen and scares him off. It turns out Plankton has a severe phobia of whales, which makes biological sense, since real-world plankton are consumed by whales. Mr. Krabs sees an opportunity. He borrows Pearl's clothes, disguises himself as a whale, and starts terrorizing Plankton. Not just once, not as a defensive measure. He stakes out the chum bucket and haunts Plankton for 16 straight days. Plankton has nightmares. He can't sleep. He grows long gray hair and claws. He's a wreck. And then, and I need you to sit with this for a second, Plankton lies down in the middle of the road and waits for a bus to run him over. He's not being melodramatic. He's not making a joke. He tells SpongeBob, and I'll paraphrase closely here, that the 4:15 bus should be along any time now. He asks SpongeBob to step on him, to crush him. And SpongeBob, the character who has built his entire identity around kindness, optimism, and seeing the best in everyone, says he can't because it would fly in the face of his good nature, and then he walks away. SpongeBob walks away from someone who is trying to kill himself. He does go to Mr. Krabs and tries to tell him that he's gone too far, but Mr. Krabs laughs. He actually laughs when he finds out Plankton is suicidal. And then, at the end of the episode, SpongeBob tells Plankton that it was Mr. Krabs in disguise the whole time, and helps Plankton get revenge by revealing Krabs' fear of mimes. But, and here's the part that makes people furious, the revenge is immediately undermined. SpongeBob turns on Plankton at the last second, using holographic whales to scare him away from the formula, and Mr. Krabs gets away with everything. This episode was universally panned. It holds a 3.7 out of 10 on IMDb, making it one of the 2 lowest rated SpongeBob episodes ever. Watch Mojo ranked it the #1 worst SpongeBob episode. Phantom Strider put it at #1 on his worst list. The Mysterious Mr. Enter ranked it #2. And here's the detail that really gets me. Clancy Brown, the voice of Mr. Krabs, reportedly expressed discomfort with the episode's content. Multiple cast and crew members have confessed to not liking it. And yet, One Course Meal was never banned. It was never pulled from streaming. You can watch it right now on Paramount+. Nickelodeon rarely airs it in reruns, but it's technically available, and that's the contradiction that keeps me up at night. An episode about a panty raid, played as a joke with a clear moral about the foolishness of the behavior, gets permanently removed from circulation. An episode about psychologically torturing a character into attempting suicide, played with disturbing sincerity, with no real consequences for the abuser, stays available. What does that tell us? I think it tells us that the standards aren't about protecting children from genuinely harmful content. They're about protecting Nickelodeon from bad headlines. Midlife crustation can be described in a tweet as, SpongeBob does a panty raid, and it sounds terrible. One course meal requires context and nuance to explain why it's problematic. One generates outrage. The other generates think pieces. And in the attention economy, outrage wins. Okay, I know I keep coming back to this idea of layers, of surfaces versus depths, but I think that's the key to everything about SpongeBob's relationship with censorship. And the next episode I want to talk about proves it in the most unexpected way possible. SpongeBob in Random Land. Season 12, Episode 256. A. First aired September 21st, 2019. Written by Kaz. And this episode did something that no Nickelodeon cartoon had ever done before. It directly referenced one of the internet's most famous creepypastas. If you don't know the story, here's the short version. Around 2010, a creepypasta, an internet horror story, started circulating about a supposedly lost SpongeBob episode called Squidward's Suicide, also known as Red Mist. The story describes a fictional intern at Nickelodeon who watches a disturbing version of what was supposed to be the season 4 premiere. In the story, Squidward performs badly at a concert, returns home in tears with red, bleeding eyes, and ultimately takes his own life. The story includes descriptions of disturbing imagery. I won't go into the specific details here. It's entirely fan-made. It has no basis in reality, but it became one of the most enduring internet urban legends of the 2000s, spawning countless YouTube videos, fan recreations, and the iconic image of Red Mist Squidward, a version of Squidward with hollow red eyes standing in a dark room. And then, in SpongeBob in Random Land, the show acknowledged it. SpongeBob and Squidward are making a delivery to a surreal location called Random Land, where the laws of physics don't apply and nothing makes sense. They find a wall of doors. Squidward opens them one by one, finding bizarre alternate versions of himself. And behind one door, in the original airing, he finds what appears to be his bedroom. The room glitches into television static, and then Red Mist Squidward appears. The actual creepypasta Squidward, staring at the camera with a burst of static noise. Squidward slams the door shut. The scene was drawn into the storyboard by Adam Paloyan, who originally wanted Red Mist Squidward's face to get closer and closer to the camera until Squidward slammed the door. Vincent Waller, the show's supervising producer, clarified on Twitter that the plot of the original Red Mist story is not canonical to the show. His exact words were, "No, not at all, but we can certainly make fun of it in all of its mythic stupidity." The scene aired on September 21st, 2019. By November 11th, it was gone. United States reruns replaced it with a short animation of baby Squidward soiling his diaper. The UK and Ireland had cut it from the original airing. Waller said it was due to a standards and practices issue. And Paloyan's response? He said, "It's actually kind of fun that it got censored." And I mean, yeah, of course it's fun that it got censored, because the censorship is the final layer of the joke. The show referenced a creepypasta about banned SpongeBob content, and then the reference itself got banned. It's recursive. It's meta in a way that only SpongeBob could pull off. The show is eating its own tail. But here's what's fascinating to me about the Red Mist scene. It reveals something about the difference between the people making SpongeBob and the people controlling SpongeBob. The creative team, the writers, the storyboard artists, they live on the internet. They know what the fans are doing. They know about the memes, the fan theories, the creepypastas, and they want to play with that material. Kaz acknowledged the popularity of Red Mist Squidward. Paloyan drew the reference into the storyboard intentionally. The creative impulse was to wink at the audience, to say, "We know what you're doing, and we think it's kind of wonderful." But Standards and Practices doesn't operate on winks. Standards and Practices operates on liability. And a scene that references a creepypasta about a character committing suicide, even as a joke, even as a meta-commentary, is a scene that could generate exactly the kind of headline Nickelodeon doesn't want. So it gets cut. The artists get their fun, and the suits get their safety. And the fans who saw the original airing get to feel like they witnessed something secret, something that wasn't supposed to exist. It's the same dynamic that plays out across the entire history of SpongeBob's censorship. The creative team pushes, the network pulls back, and the space between them is where the most interesting stories live. Let me give you another example of this, one that doesn't get talked about enough, because some of SpongeBob's most significant censorship didn't happen in the United States at all. SpongeBob SquarePants is one of the most widely broadcast cartoons in the world. It airs in over 170 countries, and different countries have wildly different standards for what's acceptable in children's programming. Some of the censorship is predictable. Sandy Cheek's bikini was considered too revealing for certain Middle Eastern broadcasts, so some episodes were trimmed or turned into clip shows. The scene in Band Geeks, where Mr. Krabs is shown on the toilet and Larry the Lobster is in the shower, was cut from certain international broadcasts. Various episodes have had gross-up close-ups removed, violence softened, or dialogue altered, but there are cases where the censorship reveals something genuinely surprising about how different cultures interpret the same content. Ukraine's QTV channel refused to air certain episodes entirely. The Indonesian broadcast still airs midlife crustation, but with some scenes removed. Taiwan's Yo-Yo TV cuts the panty raid scene, but keeps the rest. South Korea's EBS broadcast included the Just One Bite gasoline scene that had been removed everywhere else in the world. Canada, through YTV, also aired the uncut version for years. What all of this tells me is that there is no universal standard for what SpongeBob should be. Every country, every network, every streaming platform draws its own line. And the version of SpongeBob that any given person grew up with is shaped as much by geography as by the show's actual creative vision. There's another angle to the Sailor Mouth story that I've been sitting on, and I think it deserves more attention. Because the uncensored cut isn't just a curiosity. It represents something almost unprecedented in children's television. A deliberate, creator-sanctioned act of subversion built into the production process itself. When Hillenberg gave the voice actors permission to swear during recording, he wasn't being reckless. He was solving a technical problem. The actors couldn't convincingly improvise fake profanities. But the solution he chose tells you everything about his philosophy as a creator. He trusted the process. He knew the audio would be censored. He knew no child would ever hear Tom Kenny say an actual curse word while voicing SpongeBob. But he also knew that the performance would be better, more emotionally true, if the actors weren't thinking about what fake word to use, and were instead just acting. The dolphin chirps work because underneath them is a real performance. The timing, the cadence, the emotional weight of each censored moment. It's all calibrated to real language, not to euphemism. I actually went down a rabbit hole on this, and I found something I want to share. In November 2023, a voice clip surfaced on the Lost Media Wiki Discord that was supposedly from a leak of Nickelodeon production files. The clip appeared to be from the Eels and Escalator scene, and it seemed to reveal that SpongeBob's uncensored line was a specific profanity. People lost their minds. Articles were written. But here's the thing. The original poster later confirmed that the audio was edited. It was fake. It was someone who had spliced together existing audio to create a convincing hoax. The clip was debunked in December 2024. But the fact that it spread so far and so fast tells you something about the appetite for this kind of content. People desperately want to hear what's behind the curtain. They want to know what SpongeBob really said. And that desire, that compulsion to peel back the layers, is itself a form of engagement with the show that the censorship inadvertently created. Because here's what I keep thinking about. Would Sailor Mouth be as beloved if it had been banned? Would the uncensored cut be a piece of lost media that the internet obsessively hunts for if the episode had been pulled from rotation? Probably not. The episode endures because it's available. Kids can watch it. Adults can rewatch it. The conversation about what's behind the dolphin noises can happen organically in living rooms and dorm rooms and YouTube comment sections. The episode is alive because it's accessible. Compare that to midlife crustation, which is slowly fading from the collective memory because an entire generation of kids will never encounter it by accident. That's the real cost of censorship. Not that offensive content is hidden, but that complex content is lost. And speaking of complex content being lost, I need to talk about something that connects the gasoline explosion in Just One Bite to a much larger pattern in the show's visual language. Because the deleted scene isn't just a random act of slapstick. It's part of SpongeBob's relationship with the tradition of Golden Age cartoon violence. The Tex Avery, Chuck Jones, Bob Clampett tradition that Hillenberg explicitly cited as one of his influences. Hillenberg's graphic influences included Tex Avery, Chuck Jones, Bob Clampett, Max Fleischer, and John Kricfalusi. He studied under Jules Engel at CalArts, a man who had worked with some of the defining figures in animation history. The DNA of SpongeBob SquarePants is fundamentally rooted in the idea that cartoon characters can survive anything, that the rules of physics and biology don't apply, and that the audience understands this implicitly. Squidward can be set on fire and survive. SpongeBob can be flattened and bounce back. Patrick can eat his way through a mountain and suffer no consequences. This is the contract that animation makes with its audience. The violence isn't real, and everyone knows it, but the contract has terms, and those terms have changed over time. In the 1940s and 1950s, Tom and Jerry could engage in acts of extreme cartoon violence, electrocution, explosions, anvils to the head, and no one questioned whether children would imitate it. By the 1990s, the conversation had shifted. The Looney Tunes were being edited for syndication. Ren and Stimpy was pushing boundaries so hard that creator John Kricfalusi was eventually fired from his own show. And SpongeBob, which premiered in 1999, arrived at a moment when children's television was caught between two impulses: the impulse to honor the anarchic tradition of classic cartoons, and the impulse to protect children from anything that might be harmful. The Just One Bite gasoline scene sits right on that fault line. It's a classic cartoon gag. A character encounters a booby trap, gets hurt, encounters another booby trap, gets hurt worse. It's no more violent than anything Wile E. Coyote ever experienced. But it involves gasoline and matches, which are real things that real children could access. And that's the difference between cartoon violence and imitable violence, a distinction that Hillenberg and his team navigated every single day. There's something else about Just One Bite that I think has been overlooked. The episode itself, apart from the deleted scene, is one of the most sophisticated explorations of addiction in children's television. Squidward's relationship with Krabby Patties mirrors the stages of compulsive behavior with disturbing precision. He starts with denial. He takes a single bite to prove he doesn't like them. He discovers he loves them. He tries to hide his consumption from others. He eats a discarded patty out of the trash. He has dreams about the object of his obsession. He breaks into the source at 3 a.m. He consumes to the point of self-destruction. This is a kid's cartoon, an episode about a cartoon octopus eating a cartoon hamburger. And it's also one of the clearest depictions of compulsive behavior I've ever seen in any medium. The adult viewers who revisit this episode don't just see the comedy, they see themselves. They see their own relationship with food, with screens, with any behavior that starts as a choice and becomes a compulsion. And the fact that this episode exists alongside deleted content about gasoline explosions tells you something about the hierarchy of concerns at the network. The metaphorical darkness, the addiction allegory, the self-destructive behavior, that's fine. The literal darkness, fire, explosions, physical danger, that's a problem. And honestly, I'm not sure that hierarchy is wrong, but I also think the distinction is more nuanced than anyone gives it credit for, because one-course meal, which is entirely symbolic, which contains no imitable violence, is arguably more dangerous to a child's psyche than any gasoline explosion. A kid watching Squidward get burned knows it's a cartoon. A kid watching Plankton try to end his life might not understand the difference between a fictional character's despair and a real person's. Alright, I want to shift to something I've been wanting to get into, because there's a whole dimension of SpongeBob's censorship history that exists outside the United States, and it reveals some genuinely wild cultural differences. SpongeBob airs in over 170 countries, and the way the show looks can change dramatically depending on where you're watching it. In certain Middle Eastern broadcasts, Sandy Cheeks has been significantly altered because Sandy wears a bikini when she's inside her tree dome, her air-filled underwater habitat where she doesn't need her diving suit. Some broadcasters have either cut those scenes, digitally altered her appearance, or restructured episodes to avoid showing her without her suit. There are versions of SpongeBob episodes where entire plot points are rearranged because Sandy's bikini was deemed too revealing. The Persian dub, broadcast on NBC, has its own unique set of edits. Certain violent scenes, Patrick jamming a net through Squidward's bandaged hand, Squidward choking on a fork, were cut in early broadcasts, but later restored around 2018. And here's a detail I love. The red mist Squidward scene in SpongeBob in Randomland plays completely intact and uncensored in the Persian dub. The international dubbing track was sent before the scene was pulled in the US and UK. So there are Persian-speaking viewers who have seen something that American viewers can't access on any official platform. Ukraine's QTV channel refused to air certain episodes entirely. Canada, through YTV aired the uncut Just One Bite for years. South Korea's EBS broadcast still includes the gasoline scene. And Band Geeks, Season 2, Episode 15B, widely considered one of the greatest SpongeBob episodes ever made, had 2 shots removed in certain international broadcasts: Mr. Krabs on the toilet and Larry the Lobster in the shower. In the United States, these are fleeting visual gags that take up maybe 3 seconds of screen time. But in some markets, any depiction of a character in a bathroom setting was flagged. What all of this underscores is that there is no single version of SpongeBob SquarePants. The show you grew up with, the show you remember, it's shaped by the specific broadcast norms of your country, your cable provider, and the specific year you were watching. A Canadian kid in 2003 saw a different Just One Bite than an American kid in 2003. The show is a prism, and every audience receives a slightly different refraction of the same light. And I think Hillenberg would have found that fascinating and slightly horrifying, because the show he created was specific. It had a specific voice, a specific visual language. Every cut changes that. And the cumulative effect of 25 years of global censorship is that the original version of SpongeBob, the version that existed in Hillenberg's head, the version that existed on the storyboard before standards and practices got involved, may not exist anywhere in complete form. The most popular animated show of the 21st century, and there's no single definitive version of it. That's a strange thought, right? Now I want to go deeper on something, because we've been talking about individual episodes and scenes, but there's a larger pattern that I think connects everything, and it's about the show's relationship with its own darkness. SpongeBob SquarePants has always had a dark side. From the very first season, the show understood that comedy is funniest when it has teeth. Nasty Patty, Season 3, Episode 4A, aired March 1st, 2002, is an episode where SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs think they've murdered a health inspector and spend the entire episode trying to hide the body. They bury it, dig it up, stuff it in a trunk, and panic every time someone comes close to discovering it. It's a parody of every Hitchcock thriller and mob movie you've ever seen, compressed into 11 minutes and starring a cartoon sponge. And it's never been banned. It's never been censored. It's on every streaming platform. Rock Bottom, Season 1, Episode 17A, aired March 15th, 2000, is an episode that's genuinely frightening if you watch it at the right age. SpongeBob gets stranded in a deep, dark undersea city where nothing makes sense. The residents are hostile, and he can't get home. It's a Kafka-esque nightmare, disguised as a SpongeBob episode. The darkness is the point. The episode works because the viewer feels SpongeBob's isolation and fear. Graveyard Shift, Season 2, Episode 16A, aired September 6, 2002, is a horror episode. Squidward tells SpongeBob a ghost story about a former fry cook called the Hash-Slinging Slasher, who haunts the Krusty Krab at night. Every element of the story comes true. The lights flicker. The phone rings with no one on the other end. A bus arrives at midnight, and then the actual hash-slinging slasher shows up. Except he turns out to be a nervous kid looking for a job. But the episode commits to the horror atmosphere so completely that it's genuinely unsettling, especially for young viewers. The flickering lights, the shadows, the buildup of dread, it's masterfully paced and never banned. Never censored. So what separates the darkness that's allowed from the darkness that gets cut? I think it comes down to 3 things: intent, framing, and cultural moment. Nasty Patty works because the intent is satirical. Nobody actually dies. The health inspector is alive the whole time. The comedy comes from SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs' paranoid overreaction, not from actual violence. Rock Bottom works because the threat is atmospheric, not physical. SpongeBob is never in real danger. He's just scared, and scared in a way that kids can relate to. Graveyard Shift works because the horror has a punchline. The buildup is intense, but the resolution deflates the tension with comedy. One Course Meal fails this test because the threat is emotional and real. Plankton isn't scared of a ghost or lost in a dark city. He's suicidal. The framing doesn't deflate the darkness. It wallows in it. Mr. Krabs' cruelty isn't played as a character flaw that he'll learn from. It's rewarded. The moral framework that made the show's earlier dark episodes feel safe is absent. And midlife crustation was caught in a different trap entirely. The intent was satirical, the framing was comedic, and the moral was clear. But the cultural moment shifted underneath it. In 2003, a panty raid was a funny anachronism, a throwback to 1980s teen comedies that everyone understood wasn't meant to be taken seriously. By 2018, The concept of entering someone's home to take their underwear without consent had been recontextualized by the hashtag #MeToo movement into something that felt less like comedy and more like a precursor to harassment. The episode didn't change. The world around it did. This is what makes SpongeBob's censorship history so endlessly fascinating to me. It's not a story about a show that went too far. It's a story about a show that stayed the same while the ground shifted beneath it. The episodes that got banned in 2018 and beyond weren't made by people who were trying to push boundaries. They were made by people who were operating within the boundaries of their time. And the fact that those boundaries moved is a commentary on us, not on the show. Let me talk about voice acting for a moment, because I think the performances in these episodes are part of why the censorship stings. Tom Kenny's work as SpongeBob in Sailor Mouth is extraordinary. The way he delivers the dolphin chirp lines with genuine enthusiasm, genuinely believing he's just talking fancy, creates a layer of innocence that makes the profanity hilarious rather than offensive. Bill Fagerbakk's Patrick in Midlife Crustation, the casual way he drops panty raid into conversation, as if it's just another item on the agenda alongside watching laundry machines, is a masterclass in comedic timing. Clancy Brown's Mr. Krabs across all of these episodes carries a depth that elevates every scene. The desperation in Midlife Crustation, the cruelty in One Course Meal, the greed in SpongeBob, You're Fired. Brown commits fully to every shade of the character. And Roger Bumpass. I haven't talked enough about Bumpass, and I think his work as Squidward is central to the censorship conversation. Because Squidward is the character who suffers most in SpongeBob SquarePants, and the question of when his suffering is funny versus when it's cruel is at the heart of the show's evolution. In the early seasons, Squidward's misery is self-inflicted. He's a pretentious, condescending snob who refuses to enjoy anything, and the universe punishes his negativity with slapstick consequences. His suffering is karmic. It's earned. It's cathartic, because we've all known a Squidward, and watching the universe push back against his joyless worldview is satisfying. But as the show went on, particularly in seasons 4 through 8, the post-Hillenberg era, Squidward's suffering became gratuitous. It stopped being a consequence of his choices and started being a condition of his existence. He suffered because the writers needed someone to suffer, and Squidward was the path of least resistance. The toenail scene in House Fancy, the imprisonment in Good Neighbors, the public humiliation in Little Yellow Book, the infantilization in Squid Baby. These episodes aren't banned. They're all available on every platform, but they represent a kind of creative cruelty that I think is more concerning than any panty raid or dolphin chirp. Bumpass, to his credit, has always brought genuine pathos to the role. Even in the show's worst episodes, his performance grounds Squidward's suffering in something real. You feel it. And that's what makes the bad episodes bad. Not that they contain inappropriate content for children, but that they use the audience's emotional investment in a character to inflict unnecessary pain. The gasoline scene in Just One Bite is extreme, but it's brief. It's slapstick, and Squidward is fine immediately afterward. The sustained psychological torture of later seasons is worse because it lingers. It sits with you. I keep coming back to this point, but I think it's the key to everything. SpongeBob's censorship has always targeted the wrong things. The network looks at surface-level content, the word panty, the image of fire, the concept of quarantine, and makes decisions based on how that content looks in a headline. But the deeper content, the moral vacuums, the characterization failures, the episodes that normalize cruelty for comedy, those get a pass because they can't be reduced to a single objectionable word or image. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a light video. Now, I want to talk about something that connects the banned episodes to a larger conversation about SpongeBob's legacy and what Steven Hillenberg's creation has meant to an entire generation. Because the banned episodes aren't just isolated incidents. They're part of a story about what happens when a work of art becomes a commercial property, when the thing that was created out of love and weirdness and genuine artistic vision becomes a brand that needs managing. Hillenberg was born on August 21st, 1961, in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and grew up in Anaheim, California. His fascination with the ocean started young. At 15, he snorkeled for the first time at Woods Coves in Laguna Beach, and from that moment, he was hooked. He studied at Humboldt State University, earning a degree in natural resource planning and interpretation with an emphasis on marine resources in 1984. For 3 years after that, He taught marine biology at the Orange County Marine Institute, now the Ocean Institute, in Dana Point. He loved it. He talked about how enamored kids were with undersea life, especially tide pool creatures. But he was also an artist. He'd always been an artist. And while teaching at the Institute, one of the educational directors asked him if he'd be interested in creating a comic book about tidal pool animals. He created the Intertidal Zone, an educational comic featuring anthropomorphic sea creatures, including a character called Bob the Sponge, who looked like a real sea sponge rather than the kitchen sponge shape we know today. He tried to get it published as a comic book, but couldn't find a publisher. That failure, the failure to get the Intertidal Zone published, is one of the most consequential moments in television history, because it's what pushed Hillenberg toward animation. In 1989, he enrolled at CalArts. His mentor, Jules Engel, saw the comic and was impressed enough to accept him into the experimental animation program despite his lack of animation experience. Hillenberg graduated in 1992 with a Master of Fine Arts. His student films, The Green Beret and Wormholes, led to a job on Rocko's Modern Life, where he worked his way up from scriptwriter to director and producer. When Rocko ended, one of the writers, Martin Olson, read The Intertidal Zone and told Hillenberg he should develop it into a TV series. In 1994, SpongeBob became SpongeBob. The original name had to change because there was already a copyrighted mop product called SpongeBob. Hillenberg assembled a team of former Rocko colleagues and pitched the show to Nickelodeon. The pilot, Help Wanted, aired on May 1st, 1999. The series became a full show from July 17th onward. I'm giving you all of this background because I think it matters for the censorship conversation. Hillenberg wasn't a television executive who stumbled into a hit. He was a marine biologist who became an artist, who became an animator, who created a show that happened to become the biggest animated franchise on the planet. Every creative decision he made, including the decision to push boundaries, to include adult humor, to trust kids with complex material, was rooted in a genuine artistic vision. He wasn't being edgy for the sake of being edgy. He was making the show he wanted to make. When he stepped back after the first movie in 2004, the show continued, but the vision narrowed. The writers who came after Hillenberg were talented. Many of them were people Hillenberg had personally hired and mentored, but they didn't have the same authority to push back against network interference. They didn't have the same instinct for where the line was. And the result was a show that sometimes went too far. Hello, one-course meal. And sometimes didn't go far enough. The increasingly formulaic later seasons. Hillenberg returned to the franchise in a more active role, starting around season 9B, and many fans cite this as the beginning of a creative renaissance. He co-wrote the story for the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, in 2015, and served as executive producer. He was more involved in the show's creative direction, and then, in March 2017, he was diagnosed with ALS. He kept working. He continued to review episodes. He continued to be involved in the show's creative direction, even as his body deteriorated. He died on November 26, 2018, at the age of 57. The internet mourned in a way that felt different from typical celebrity deaths. This wasn't just a showrunner. This was the person who had given an entire generation their sense of humor, their memes, their shared cultural language. When people say, "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" or I'm ready," or "the inner machinations of my mind are an enigma," they're quoting Steven Hillenberg's show. His fingerprints are on every frame of the first 3 seasons, and his influence pervades everything that came after. And after he died, the decisions accelerated. Camp Coral launched in March 2021, a prequel series showing the SpongeBob characters as children at summer camp. The Patrick Star Show launched in July 2021, a spin-off centered on Patrick's family. Neither of these projects had Hillenberg's blessing. He had specifically and repeatedly expressed opposition to spin-offs. Tibbetts' recollection of Hillenberg's SpongeBob Babies comment was well known within the production team, and Hillenberg's own words, spoken in various interviews, made clear that he saw SpongeBob as a specific thing, not a franchise to be expanded indefinitely. The spin-offs aren't banned episodes. They're not censored content, but they're relevant to this conversation because they represent the same dynamic. The creative vision and the commercial imperative pulling in opposite directions. Hillenberg wanted the show to be finite, specific, irreducible. Nickelodeon wanted it to be infinite, expandable, exploitable. And the censorship decisions, the choice to pull midlife crustation while greenlit Camp Corral are symptoms of the same underlying condition, a company that values the brand more than the art. I want to shift gears now and talk about something that doesn't usually come up in discussions about banned SpongeBob episodes, but I think it should, because some of the show's most controversial content was never banned at all. It was just allowed to exist, uncomfortably, in a show made for children. A Pal for Gary, Season 7, Episode 5. B, aired January 2nd, 2010. And I want to be careful here, because this isn't a banned episode, but it's an episode that generated such intense backlash that it fundamentally changed the way fans talked about SpongeBob's decline. The plot is simple. SpongeBob feels guilty about leaving Gary home alone while he's at work, so he ignores the warnings of an old gypsy woman and brings home a new pet called Puffy Fluffy. Puffy Fluffy is a monster. It terrorizes Gary. It grows into something grotesque and dangerous. And SpongeBob, the character we've been told for years is caring, empathetic, and good-hearted, blames Gary. Every single time Gary is attacked, SpongeBob scolds him. "Gary, you put Fluffy down right now," he says, while Gary is literally inside the creature's mouth. The episode holds a 3.3 out of 10 on IMDb, the lowest rating of any SpongeBob episode. It's the episode that, for many fans, crystallized what had gone wrong with the show after Hillenberg stepped back. SpongeBob's characterization felt broken. The moral compass of the show, the thing that made even its darkest episodes feel safe, was gone. And I bring this up because it connects to a larger pattern. The episodes that got banned from SpongeBob weren't necessarily the worst ones. Midlife Crustation is widely considered a great episode. Sailor Mouth is one of the most beloved episodes in the entire series. Just One Bite is a fan favorite. The episodes that most deserved scrutiny, the ones where the show's moral framework actually failed, where characters were tortured without purpose and lessons went unlearned, those episodes stayed. This is one of those things I think about randomly at like 2 a.m. The show's actual moral failures are hiding in plain sight, while the episodes that played with taboos in smart, intentional ways get scrubbed from the record. Let me talk about SpongeBob, You're Fired for a moment, because it's another case study in this phenomenon. Season 9, Episode 11, aired November 11th, 2013. And I'll be honest, this one makes me genuinely frustrated. Not because of the episode itself, but because of what happened around it. The plot: Mr. Krabs fires SpongeBob to save a nickel. SpongeBob spirals into depression. He wanders from restaurant to restaurant, getting hired and fired for being unable to cook anything other than Krabby Patties. Eventually, multiple restaurant owners literally kidnap him because their customers loved his food. Squidward rescues him, and Mr. Krabs rehires him at the end. The controversy around SpongeBob, You're Fired wasn't about the content being inappropriate for children. It was about the episode's perceived message about unemployment. Political commentators on both sides seized on it. Some read it as a conservative criticism of the social safety net. Patrick encourages SpongeBob to embrace fun employment, to stop looking for work, and just enjoy being lazy. Others read it as a critique of exploitative employers. Mr. Krabs fires his most loyal employee over a nickel. Fox News ran segments on it. MSNBC ran segments on it. A cartoon about a sponge getting fired from a fast food restaurant became a flashpoint in the American culture war. And Nickelodeon almost never airs it in reruns. Not because it was formally banned, but because it generates the kind of political attention that a children's network doesn't want. It exists in this gray zone, available but invisible, technically accessible but practically forgotten. Like a lot of the show's most controversial episodes, it's been quietly shelved rather than officially removed. This is what I mean when I say that SpongeBob's censorship is a map. Each episode that gets pulled, cut, trimmed, or buried tells you something about the era it was pulled in. Midlife Crustation tells you about #MeToo and the limits of retroactive standards. Quarantined Crab tells you about the pandemic and the tyranny of bad timing. Just One Bite tells you about 9/11 and the fear of imitable violence. SpongeBob in Randomland tells you about the internet and the uncontrollable relationship between a show and its fan base. SpongeBob, You're Fired tells you about the politicization of children's media. And One Course Meal, the one that stayed, tells you that the system isn't actually about protecting anyone. It's about protecting the brand. I want to go deeper now, because there's a whole category of SpongeBob censorship that most people don't know about. Scenes that were cut not because of network decisions, but because the storyboard artists and writers made choices during production that got scaled back before the episodes ever aired. And these stories are some of the most revealing windows into how the show actually gets made. Take Have You Seen This Snail? Season 4, Episode 68, also known as Where's Gary? This is one of the show's most emotional episodes, in which Gary runs away from home because SpongeBob has been neglecting him. Gary ends up in the care of a kindly old woman who turns out to be a snail collector who may have been overfeeding her previous snails. It's a surprisingly mature episode about neglect, independence, and the responsibilities of pet ownership. But in the original storyboard, the old woman, Granny, wasn't just overfeeding the snails. She was fattening Gary up to eat him. The storyboard had her holding an axe. The implication was that every snail she'd ever taken in had been consumed. Nickelodeon's standards and practices stepped in during production and changed the plot. Instead of eating the snails, Granny was simply mistaking Gary for her long-lost snail, Miss Tuftsy. The axe was replaced with a cookie tray. I've seen snippets of the original storyboard, and it's genuinely dark. It reframes the entire episode from a story about a loving but misguided old woman into a story about a predator who fattens up her prey. And I understand why it was changed. That's a legitimate creative decision about tone. But it also tells you something about the instincts of the storyboard artists. Their first impulse was to go dark. The show's creative DNA has always pointed toward the shadows, and the role of standards and practices has always been to pull it back toward the light. There are dozens of these stories. Gary Takes a Bath, Season 2, Episode 37A, has a scene where SpongeBob tries to convince Gary to take a bath. In the original version, SpongeBob tells Gary that if he doesn't bathe, a bomb strapped to his chest will explode. That scene was cut from later airings. Think about that. A main character threatens his pet with a bomb. In a Nickelodeon cartoon, that aired on television, and then someone decided, after the fact, that maybe it shouldn't have. The thing about SpongeBob is that it rewards rewatching in a way that almost no other animated show does. Every single time, you catch a visual gag or a background detail you missed. And when you start specifically looking for censored or altered content, you realize the show is a palimpsest, a document that's been written, erased, and written over again, with traces of the original still visible if you know where to look. I keep thinking about Steven Hillenberg through all of this, about what he would have made of the censorship, the bans, the culture wars being fought over his cartoon about a sea sponge. Hillenberg was diagnosed with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, in March 2017. He passed away on November 26, 2018, at the age of 57. By the time Midlife Crustation was being pulled from rotation, Hillenberg was fighting a degenerative neurological disease. By the time SpongeBob in Random Land was referencing creepypastas about his show and getting censored for it, he was gone. And I can't help wondering, would things have been different if he'd still been there? Would his voice, his authority as the creator, have changed the calculus? He was a man who once told his colleagues that his biggest nightmare was being at the beach and seeing one of his SpongeBob dolls wash up on the shore like garbage. He worried about what the commercial machine was doing to his creation. He specifically didn't want spin-off shows. Paul Tibbitt recalled Hillenberg saying, "You know, one of these days, they're going to want to make SpongeBob babies. That's when I'm out of here." And then, after he died, they made Camp Corral, SpongeBob's Underyears, a show about the SpongeBob characters as children at summer camp. Literally SpongeBob babies. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's relevant to the question of censorship and control. The show that Hillenberg created was a living reflection of his values, his love of the ocean, his commitment to genuine craft, his belief that the best comedy comes from a place of honesty. And the censorship decisions that have been made since he stepped back, and especially since he passed, reflect a different set of values entirely. Corporate values, brand management values, the values of a company that treats SpongeBob not as a work of art, but as a revenue stream that must be protected from anything that could disrupt the cash flow. Look, I've watched a lot of SpongeBob, more than I can count. And what I keep coming back to is this: the show's greatest episodes are the ones that take risks. Sailor Mouth works because it trusts the audience to understand the difference between a cartoon character saying a dolphin noise and a child actually swearing. Midlife Crustacean works because it treats the audience like adults who can understand that a panty raid is the punchline, not the point. Just One Bite works because physical comedy, even extreme physical comedy, is cathartic. It's a cartoon, and cartoons are a safe space for things that would be horrifying in real life. And the show's worst episodes, One Course Meal, A Pal for Gary, the parade of Squidward torture episodes that define the middle seasons, fail because they don't take risks. They take shortcuts. They mistake cruelty for comedy. They abandon the moral framework that made the early seasons feel safe, even when they were being transgressive. The banned episodes are, for the most part, the good ones. The episodes that remain are, in some cases, the ones that should have been reconsidered. And that inversion, that the show's best work is the work being hidden, while its worst work is freely available, is maybe the most damning thing I can say about how Nickelodeon has handled Steven Hillenberg's legacy. I want to talk about something else now, because there's an angle to the banned episodes conversation that I don't think gets enough attention, and it's about the fans. SpongeBob SquarePants has one of the most active and dedicated fan communities in animation history. The SpongeBob Community Forum has been running for over a decade. Encyclopedia SpongeBobia on fandom has over 18,000 pages. There are Discord servers with thousands of members dedicated to cataloging every frame, every background detail, every production code. And when episodes get banned, these communities don't just notice, they mobilize. The response to Midlife Crustation being pulled was immediate and passionate. Fans shared clips, debated the decision, and pointed out what they saw as the hypocrisy of removing an episode with a panty raid joke while leaving episodes with far darker content in rotation. When Just One Bite lost its deleted scene, fans treated it as a piece of lost media, creating 4K upscales of the gasoline explosion from international broadcasts, petitioning Nickelodeon to restore it, and documenting every version of the episode across every country. And here's what's really interesting. The fans, more than anyone, understand the layers. They get that Sailor Mouth is about linguistic taboos, not about teaching kids to swear. They get that Midlife Crustation is about aging and desperation, not about normalizing raids of any kind. They get that the Just One Bite explosion is slapstick in the tradition of Looney Tunes, not a realistic depiction of arson. The fans have always been more sophisticated readers of the show than the standards and practices departments that censor it. And I think that's because the fans grew up with the show. The people who are most passionate about SpongeBob SquarePants in 2026 are the people who first watched it when they were 5 or 8 or 10 years old, and who are now in their 20s and 30s. They've lived with these characters for their entire lives. They've rewatched episodes hundreds of times. They understand the show's internal logic, its moral compass, its comedic grammar, in a way that no network executive ever could. And when that network executive removes an episode that the fanbase considers part of its collective childhood, it doesn't feel like content moderation. It feels like erasure. Writer Allegra Frank at Slate put it well when Midlife Crustation was pulled in 2021. She wrote, and I'll paraphrase here, that as someone who uses Paramount Plus specifically for nostalgia, seeing a piece of SpongeBob history stripped away by its own parent company was jarring. There are hundreds of other SpongeBob episodes to watch, but none of them can replicate the specific warm feeling of rewatching something you remember from childhood. That's the thing about banned episodes. Every time one gets pulled, it doesn't just disappear from a streaming library. It disappears from the cultural record. Kids growing up now will never stumble across Midlife Crustation while flipping through SpongeBob on Paramount Plus. They'll never see the gasoline explosion in Just One Bite. They'll never see Red Mist Squidward in SpongeBob in Random Land. Their SpongeBob will be a slightly smaller, slightly safer SpongeBob than the one that existed before. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends entirely on whether you think children are better served by a world that protects them from difficult content, or a world that trusts them to understand it. And I want to dig into this question more deeply, because it connects to something fundamental about SpongeBob's genius, the show's relationship with absurdism. SpongeBob SquarePants is, at its core, an absurdist comedy. Not in the vague, colloquial sense of it's random and wacky, but in the philosophical sense. The show presents a world where the normal rules of reality don't apply, where fire can burn underwater, where a sponge can work as a fry cook, where a squirrel lives in an air dome at the bottom of the ocean, and then asks its characters to navigate that impossible world with the same emotional complexity as real people. SpongeBob loves his job. Squidward hates his. Mr. Krabs hoards money he can never spend enough of. Plankton schemes endlessly for a recipe he'll never obtain. Patrick simply exists, unencumbered by ambition or self-awareness. The absurdism is the point. The show uses the impossible physics of Bikini Bottom to explore the emotional reality of ordinary life. And the banned episodes, every single one of them, operate on that same principle. Sailor Mouth uses a censored bad word to explore the arbitrary nature of linguistic taboos. Midlife Crustation uses a panty raid to explore the desperation of aging. One Course Meal uses a whale costume to explore the ethics of fear and power. Quarantined Crab uses a fictional disease to explore mass hysteria and mob mentality. Each episode takes something that would be disturbing in real life: profanity, theft, psychological abuse, pandemic, and refracts it through the absurdist lens of Bikini Bottom, where the emotional truth survives, but the literal danger doesn't. The problem is that absurdism requires an audience willing to see both layers simultaneously. You have to be able to look at Plankton lying in the road and understand that this is both a cartoon character doing something that wouldn't actually hurt him because he's a 1-inch tall animated plankton in a fictional underwater city, and a metaphor for genuine despair because the emotions the scene evokes are real, even if the scenario isn't. Kids can do this. Kids are actually incredibly good at this. They navigate the gap between fantasy and reality every time they play make-believe. But institutions can't. Institutions operate on literalism. And when an institution looks at an 11-minute cartoon about a character wanting to be run over by a bus, it doesn't see absurdism. It sees a liability. This is why I think the conversation about banned SpongeBob episodes is really a conversation about the death of nuance in institutional decision-making. Every banned episode is a case where an institution chose the literal reading over the layered reading, the headline over the context, the immediate risk over the long-term value. And I get it. I genuinely do. Nickelodeon is a children's network. They have a responsibility to the millions of kids who watch their programming. One wrong decision could genuinely harm a child who sees something they're not equipped to process. The stakes are real. But the alternative, the world where every potentially uncomfortable moment is scrubbed from children's entertainment, isn't safe either. It's just empty. Because the moments that make SpongeBob memorable, the moments that people carry with them for 25 years, the moments that turned a cartoon about a sea sponge into the defining cultural artifact of a generation, those moments are, almost without exception, the ones that take risks. Band Geeks is great because it gives Squidward a genuine moment of triumph that the show never undermines. Chocolate with Nuts is great because it lets SpongeBob and Patrick's naive optimism crash headfirst into the harsh reality of salesmanship. Pizza Delivery is great because it lets Squidward show genuine compassion for SpongeBob when a customer treats him cruelly. None of these are banned episodes, but they all contain emotional complexity that, in a slightly different context, could be flagged as too much for kids. The pizza delivery scene, where Squidward walks back to the customer who made SpongeBob cry and says, "Well, this one's on the house," before slamming the pizza box in the guy's face. That's a scene about violence, motivated by friendship. It's about a character who supposedly hates SpongeBob, discovering that he actually cares about him. It's beautiful, but if you describe it in a headline, SpongeBob character assaults restaurant customer, it sounds like a controversy waiting to happen. The only reason it's not controversial is that everyone who's seen it understands the context. And that understanding, that willingness to engage with context, is exactly what the censorship of other episodes removes from the equation. I want to talk about memes for a minute, because SpongeBob's meme culture is directly connected to the banned episodes conversation in ways that I don't think have been fully explored. SpongeBob SquarePants is the most memed show in television history, and I don't mean that hyperbolically. Studies of internet culture consistently rank SpongeBob as the single largest source of image macros, reaction images, and video edits on the English language internet. Mocking SpongeBob, Imagination Rainbow. Is this a SpongeBob looking at a butterfly? 2 hours later, I don't need it, I don't need it, I need it. Who put you on the planet? The inner machinations of my mind are an enigma. Milk spills. The show has produced more viral content than any other animated series, and arguably more than any other television show period. And here's the connection to censorship. Memes thrive on decontextualization. A meme takes a single frame, a single line of dialogue, a single moment from the show, and strips away all surrounding context, repurposing it for whatever meaning the internet wants to assign. Mocking SpongeBob has nothing to do with the episode it comes from. It's a universal template for sarcasm. Surprised Patrick has nothing to do with the scene where Patrick is surprised. It's a universal reaction image. But banned and censored content generates a different kind of meme. Instead of decontextualized frames, banned content generates mythology. The just one bite gasoline scene became an internet legend, a piece of forbidden content that fans traded like contraband. The red mist Squidward image, which started as a creepypasta, became a meme that the show itself acknowledged. The uncensored sailor mouth became a white whale that the internet has been chasing for over 2 decades. These aren't reaction images, they're origin stories. They're the SpongeBob equivalent of lost episodes and bootleg recordings, rare artifacts that gain value precisely because they're unavailable. And this creates a paradox for Nickelodeon. Every time they ban an episode or cut a scene, they increase its cultural value. Midlife Crustation was a well-liked but relatively unremarkable Season 3 episode for 15 years. Now, it's famous specifically because it's banned. More people have heard of it than have actually watched it. The ban transformed it from a piece of SpongeBob ephemera into a cultural landmark. Nickelodeon wanted to make the episode invisible, and instead they made it iconic. The Super Bowl halftime controversy is another example of this dynamic. And while it's not directly about a banned episode, it's worth mentioning because it shows how SpongeBob's fan community can mobilize around a perceived wrong. In February 2019, 2 months after Steven Hillenberg's death, the Super Bowl 53 halftime show briefly featured a clip from Band Geeks. The clip of Squidward introducing the performance, with SpongeBob and the Bikini Bottom Superband appearing momentarily before cutting to Maroon 5 and Travis Scott performing Sicko Mode. Fans had petitioned for a full tribute to Hillenberg, requesting that the show perform Sweet Victory, the song from Band Geeks, in his memory. The brief tease followed by the cut to the actual performance felt, to millions of SpongeBob fans, like a bait and switch. The backlash was enormous. I bring this up because it illustrates the intensity of the relationship between SpongeBob's audience and the corporate entities that control the property. The fans feel genuine ownership over this show. They grew up with it. They memorized the dialogue. They built communities around it. And when Nickelodeon or any other corporate entity makes a decision that the fans disagree with, whether it's cutting to Sicko Mode instead of Sweet Victory, or pulling Midlife Crustation from streaming, or launching spin-offs that Hillenberg opposed, the response is visceral. It's personal, because SpongeBob isn't just a show to these people. It's a language. It's a shared cultural vocabulary, and any alteration to that vocabulary feels like an erasure of identity. I think this is why the banned episodes conversation generates so much more heat than you'd expect. On the surface, it's a relatively minor issue, a handful of episodes, out of nearly 300, that aren't available on one streaming platform. But beneath the surface, it's a question about who owns a cultural artifact. Does SpongeBob belong to Nickelodeon, which funded and distributed it? Does it belong to Steven Hillenberg, who created it? Does it belong to Tom Kenny and the voice actors who literally gave it a voice? Or does it belong to the millions of people who grew up watching it, quoting it, and building their sense of humor around it? The answer, legally, is clear. SpongeBob SquarePants is the property of Viacom, now Paramount Global. They can do whatever they want with it. They can ban episodes, launch spin-offs, license the characters for toothpaste and breakfast cereal, and theme park rides. They own it. But emotionally, culturally, the answer is different. And I think the reason banned SpongeBob episodes generate so much passion is that every ban is a reminder that the thing you love doesn't actually belong to you. That the show you grew up with, the characters you know better than some real people, the jokes you've repeated 1,000 times, all of it can be altered, removed, or reclassified by a corporate entity whose primary concern is not your childhood memories, but its quarterly earnings. And look, I'm not trying to paint Nickelodeon as the villain here. They're a company doing what companies do, and some of their censorship decisions have been defensible, even necessary. Pulling quarantined Crab during the early months of a pandemic that was killing thousands of people every day was the right call. Cutting the gasoline scene from Just One Bite in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 was understandable. Even pulling Midlife Crustation, while I personally disagree with the decision, was made in good faith by people who were trying to apply contemporary standards to content that was created in a different era. But good faith doesn't make the decisions right. And the pattern, the consistent pattern of removing the show's smartest, most layered content while leaving its crudest, most problematic content untouched, suggests that the decision-making process is fundamentally misaligned with the show's actual values. There's another episode I want to bring into this conversation, and it's one that occupies a strange space between controversial and celebrated. Are You Happy Now? Season 8, Episode 169. Aired March 31st, 2012. In this episode, Squidward realizes he doesn't have a single happiest memory. SpongeBob tries to create one for him through a series of increasingly elaborate events, all of which fail catastrophically. And at two separate points in the episode, Squidward appears to be about to do something very dark. In the first scene, he's standing at the top of a building, looking down, and SpongeBob rushes up in a panic. But Squidward was just fixing an air conditioner. In the second, he's in a dark room, reaches for something above him, and there's a snapping sound. But he was just pulling a chain to turn on a lamp, after which he puts his head in an oven, which he then opens to reveal a cake, acting casual. The show is playing with the audience's expectations. It's deliberately invoking the imagery and language of despair, then pulling the rug. And the fan community has been divided about this episode ever since it aired. Some see it as a darkly brilliant examination of depression that uses misdirection to make its audience confront their own assumptions. Others see it as the show toying with extremely sensitive subject matter in a way that's irresponsible for a children's program. And several fans have drawn a direct line between this episode and the Squidward suicide creepypasta, arguing that the writers were deliberately engaging with that internet mythology years before SpongeBob and Random Land made the connection explicit. Are You Happy Now? Was never banned, never censored. It airs regularly. And I bring it up because it illustrates, again, the inconsistency of the standards being applied. This episode contains repeated visual references to self-harm, references that only work if the audience understands what they're referencing, and it stays. Midlife Crustation contains a goofy scene about stealing underwear from someone's mother, and it goes, the system isn't coherent, it's reactive. It responds to external pressure, not internal logic. And I think that reactivity is actually the biggest problem, because when censorship decisions are made reactively, in response to a headline, a social media backlash, a cultural moment, they tend to overcorrect. The network doesn't sit down and systematically evaluate every episode against a consistent set of principles. It waits until something becomes a problem, then removes the problem, which means the episodes that fly under the radar, the ones that don't generate headlines, the ones whose problematic elements are too subtle or too complex to summarize in a tweet, those episodes survive. And the ones that can be reduced to a single scandalous image or phrase, those are the ones that get pulled. This is, in essence, the difference between governance and crisis management. A well-governed content library would apply consistent principles across its entire catalog. A crisis-managed content library lurches from one controversy to the next, making ad hoc decisions that often contradict each other. And SpongeBob's censorship history is a textbook case of the latter. I want to tell you about one more thing before we start wrapping up, because it's something that's been nagging at me, and I think it deserves attention. It's about the relationship between SpongeBob's banned content and the broader ecosystem of content moderation in our lives. We're living in a moment where content moderation, the practice of deciding what can and can't be shown on a platform, is one of the defining challenges of our era. Social media companies wrestle with it every day. Streaming platforms make content decisions that affect millions of viewers, and the fundamental questions that SpongeBob's censorship raises: who decides what's appropriate? What role does context play? Can a single piece of content be appropriate for one audience and inappropriate for another? Are the same questions being asked across every digital platform in the world? The difference is that SpongeBob's censorship operates in a space where the stakes feel lower. Nobody's going to start a war because of a SpongeBob episode. The content itself is, by any reasonable measure, harmless. And that's what makes it such a useful case study, because when the content is harmless, the decision-making process becomes transparent. You can see the machinery more clearly when it's not obscured by genuine danger. And what the machinery reveals, when you strip away the noise, is this: the people making content moderation decisions are not evaluating content. They're evaluating risk. They're not asking, is this episode harmful? They're asking, could someone plausibly argue that this episode is harmful? And if so, what would that cost us? That's a fundamentally different question, and it leads to fundamentally different outcomes. Sailor mouth is not harmful. No child has ever learned a swear word from a dolphin chirp, but someone could argue it's harmful. And in fact, the Parents Television Council did exactly that. So the episode survives not because it was cleared of charges, but because the argument against it was unconvincing enough that the network felt safe keeping it. Midlife crustacean is not harmful. No child has ever been inspired to commit a panty raid by an 11-minute cartoon, but someone could argue it's harmful. And in the post-Me Too landscape, that argument was convincing enough that the network didn't feel safe keeping it. The content is the same. The risk calculation is different. And that's the key insight. Censorship in children's media is not primarily about children. It's about the adults who might complain about what children are watching. I think about this a lot, probably too much. There's a line from Eric Wiesa, who helped storyboard Sailor Mouth. He called it his favorite episode to work on, mainly because of its random and satirical nature. And he added something I find quietly profound. Sometimes SpongeBob just catches me off guard. And I think that's the essence of what made the show great. The capacity to surprise, to catch you off guard, to make you think, even for a second, that a cartoon about a sea sponge has something genuine and unexpected to say about the world. The banned episodes are the moments where the show caught people off guard, and the people it caught were the ones with the power to make it stop. Remember what I said earlier about this being a map? I want to pull that thread one more time. The trend in children's media over the past decade has been toward increased sensitivity, increased caution, increased control over what audiences are exposed to. Content warnings have become standard. Entire episodes of classic shows have been removed from platforms. Not just SpongeBob, but many other series that contained content acceptable when it aired, but now considered problematic. And the argument in favor of this trend is compelling. We know more now about how media affects children, about how representation shapes identity, about how normalization works. We should be thoughtful about what we put in front of kids. We should evolve our standards as our understanding evolves. But the argument against it is equally compelling, because every time you remove a piece of media from the cultural record, you don't just remove the content, you remove the conversation it was part of. Midlife Crustacean isn't just an episode with a panty raid. It's an episode about aging, about masculinity, about the gap between who you are and who you wish you were. Remove it, and you lose the panty raid. But you also lose everything else. You lose C.H. Greenblatt and Kaz's sharp, layered writing. You lose Clancy Brown's vulnerable performance. You lose the quiet ending where Mr. Krabs lies in his childhood bedroom and feels, for one small moment, young again. The baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, and the baby, in this case, is art. Okay, I've been going for a while now, and I want to start pulling the threads together, because there's a bigger picture here that I think has been emerging throughout this entire video, and I want to name it explicitly. The story of SpongeBob's banned episodes is, ultimately, a story about trust. It's about whether we trust children to process complex, ambiguous, sometimes uncomfortable content, and whether the institutions that create content for children trust themselves to navigate that complexity responsibly. Hillenberg trusted the audience. He made a show that was silly on the surface and profound underneath, and he believed, correctly as it turned out, that kids would get both layers. He trusted that a kid watching SpongeBob learn a bad word would understand the lesson about why bad words are bad. He trusted that a kid watching Mr. Krabs go on a panty raid would understand the lesson about the foolishness of chasing youth. He trusted that a kid watching Squidward get set on fire would understand that this is a cartoon and not an instruction manual. The network, increasingly, doesn't trust the audience. And I think that's partly because the network's audience has changed. In 1999, SpongeBob was watched primarily on television, in a controlled environment, often with a parent nearby. In 2026, SpongeBob is watched on streaming platforms, on phones, on tablets, by kids who are often watching alone. The viewing context has changed, and with it, the network's confidence that the audience will bring the right frame of reference to the content. But I don't think that justifies the current approach, because the episodes that get banned aren't the ones that are genuinely dangerous for unsupervised viewing. They're the ones that are politically inconvenient. And there's a difference between protecting children and protecting a brand, a difference that Nickelodeon has, in my opinion, consistently failed to observe. Here's where I land on it, for whatever my opinion is worth. I think SpongeBob SquarePants at its best was never safe. It was never supposed to be safe. Steven Hillenberg created a show that was grounded in the beauty and weirdness of the ocean, populated by characters who embodied every messy, contradictory, deeply human impulse: greed, loneliness, ambition, laziness, joy, cruelty, love. The show worked because it trusted kids to navigate those impulses alongside the characters. It didn't shield them from Mr. Krabs' greed. It let them see the greed and decide for themselves what they thought about it. It didn't protect them from Squidward's misery. It let them sit with the misery and learn empathy from it. It didn't hide the concept of profanity. It let SpongeBob discover a bad word and learn why it's bad, which is infinitely more useful than pretending bad words don't exist. The banned episodes represent the moments when that trust broke down, when the network decided it couldn't rely on the audience to understand. And every time that happens, the show gets a little smaller, a little more contained, a little further from the wild, boundary-pushing thing that Steven Hillenberg originally created. I want to take a moment here and talk about something that I've been circling around but haven't addressed directly, and that's the question of whether any of this actually matters. Whether it's worth spending this much time, your time, my time, talking about which episodes of a children's cartoon are and aren't available on a streaming platform. Because I can hear the counter-argument. It's a cartoon. It's SpongeBob. There are real problems in the world. Who cares if one 11-minute episode about a panty raid isn't on Paramount Plus? And here's what I'd say to that. The reason it matters isn't because any individual episode is essential viewing. It's because the principle behind the ban is the same principle that governs how we relate to all culture, all media, all art. The question of who gets to decide what you're allowed to see, and on what basis, isn't a trivial question. It's the most important question in a democratic society. And the fact that it's playing out in the context of a cartoon about a sea sponge doesn't make it less important. It makes it more accessible, more tangible, more real. When Nickelodeon pulls Midlife Crustation from Paramount Plus, they're not just making a content decision. They're participating in a broader cultural process of retroactive reevaluation, a process that also affects museums, deciding which artworks to display, publishers deciding which books to keep in print, and streaming services deciding which films and shows to carry. The specific content being evaluated is different in each case, but the questions are the same. Should we judge art by the standards of the time it was created, or by the standards of the present? Should the potential for misinterpretation override the artistic intent? Should access be restricted based on what a piece of content might mean to the most uncharitable possible viewer, or should we trust audiences to engage thoughtfully? These questions don't have easy answers, and anyone who tells you they do, whether they're arguing for unrestricted access or for strict content curation, is selling you something. The truth is somewhere in the complicated middle, where competing values, artistic freedom, child safety, cultural preservation, corporate responsibility, jostle against each other without ever fully resolving. But I think the SpongeBob case is instructive because it's so transparently about brand protection rather than genuine concern for children's welfare. If Nickelodeon genuinely believed that midlife crustation was harmful to children, they would have pulled it in 2003 when it first aired, not in 2018 when the cultural conversation shifted. The fact that the episode was considered perfectly appropriate for 15 years, that it aired hundreds of times, was included in DVD box sets marketed to children, and was reviewed positively by critics, proves that the content itself isn't the problem. The problem is the context, and context changes. Which brings me to a thought experiment that I want to leave you with. Imagine it's 2040, 14 years from now. SpongeBob SquarePants is still airing, 41 years into its run. The cultural context has shifted again, in ways we can't predict. What episodes that are currently available will seem unacceptable by 2040 standards? What content that we currently consider harmless will be reevaluated as problematic? I have no idea. But I'll tell you this, whatever gets banned in 2040 will tell us something about 2040, not about SpongeBob. Just as the bans of 2018 tell us about 2018, and the censorship of 2001 tells us about 2001. The show is a mirror. The episodes that get removed are the reflections that make us uncomfortable. Let me talk about one final thread that ties everything together. Because I've been talking about censorship as though it's something that happens to SpongeBob from the outside, as though the show is a static thing that external forces act upon. But that's not entirely true, because SpongeBob SquarePants has also censored itself. Some of the most significant creative decisions in the show's history were acts of self-censorship, moments where the writers, the storyboard artists, or the showrunner looked at something they'd created and decided, on their own, that it went too far. The original plot for Have You Seen This Snail, with Granny fattening Gary up to eat him, was changed during production, not by standards and practices, but by the creative team itself. The show's writers understood that there's a difference between being dark and being cruel, and they made the adjustment. Hillenberg himself was a self-censor of the highest order. He had specific rules about what the show should and shouldn't do. He didn't want SpongeBob to be mean-spirited. He didn't want the show to rely on gross-out humor or shock value. He believed in earned laughs, comedy that came from character and situation, not from pushing buttons. And when the show strayed from those principles, as it increasingly did in the seasons after he stepped back, the quality declined. Not because the network was censoring the wrong things, but because the show was no longer censoring itself in the right ways. This is the paradox at the heart of SpongeBob's relationship with censorship. The show was at its best when the creator was the one setting the limits. Hillenberg's self-imposed boundaries, his insistence on kindness as SpongeBob's core trait, his commitment to earned comedy, his refusal to be gratuitously mean weren't restrictions. They were the framework that made the show's risks feel safe. When he let SpongeBob learn a bad word, the audience trusted that the episode would handle it responsibly, because Hillenberg had earned that trust over years of consistent creative choices. The network's censorship, by contrast, doesn't earn anything. It's imposed from above, without the creative context that would make it meaningful. It's the equivalent of a teacher confiscating a student's drawing because it's inappropriate, without asking the student what they were trying to express. The action addresses the surface, but ignores the depth. And in doing so, it undermines the very trust between creator and audience that made the show work in the first place. You know what's funny? Not funny, haha. Funny in that cosmic 2 a.m. sort of way. The most subversive thing SpongeBob ever did wasn't the bad words, or the panty raids, or the creepypasta references. The most subversive thing SpongeBob ever did was be sincere. In an era of ironic detachment, of cynical reboots, of everything being a self-aware commentary on itself, SpongeBob SquarePants was, at its core, a show about a character who was genuinely, unapologetically, almost painfully happy. SpongeBob loves his job. He loves his friends. He loves his pet snail. He loves jellyfishing. He loves the Krusty Krab. He loves life. And that sincerity, that willingness to be earnest in a world that rewards coolness, is the thing that made the show connect with people in a way nothing else has. It's why the show became the largest source of internet memes. It's why people mourned Steven Hillenberg like they'd lost a family member. It's why, 27 years after the pilot aired, people are still watching, still quoting, still making videos like this one about a cartoon they first saw when they were 5. The banned episodes are attempts to preserve that sincerity by removing things that might complicate it. But sincerity doesn't need protection. It needs honesty, and the most honest version of SpongeBob SquarePants is the complete version. The version that includes the bad words, and the panty raids, and the gasoline explosions, and the creepypasta references, because those things are part of the show's complete emotional and comedic range. They're part of what makes it feel alive. I want to come back to something I said at the very beginning, because it's been rattling around in my head this entire time. What does it mean when a show made for children contains something that children aren't allowed to see? I've spent hours, honestly, way more hours than I should admit, reading through production notes, fan forum posts, interview transcripts, censorship comparisons, and international broadcast logs. I've traced the timeline of every major ban and censorship decision. I've compared what was cut to what was kept. And the conclusion I keep arriving at is this: the banned episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants aren't the problem. They're the symptom. The real problem is that we've built a system in which the people who make art for children and the people who control that art have fundamentally different ideas about what children can handle. The artists trust kids. The executives protect the brand. And the art gets caught in the middle. I've been thinking about Steven Hillenberg's career trajectory, and there's something about it that I find deeply moving in the context of this conversation. He started as a marine biology teacher. He spent 3 years at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, surrounded by children who were fascinated by tide pools and sea creatures. He saw, firsthand, how quickly kids engage with the natural world when it's presented honestly, without condescension, without sanitization, without the removal of anything that might be scary or weird or confusing. Tide pools are strange places. They're full of creatures that are beautiful and grotesque simultaneously. Sea anemones eat things alive. Starfish push their stomachs out through their mouths. Hermit crabs steal each other's shells. The ocean, at the tidal margin, is not a safe or sanitized place. It's wild and chaotic and endlessly fascinating. And that's what Hillenberg brought to SpongeBob. Not just his love of the ocean, but his understanding that kids don't need the world to be clean and organized and risk-free. They need it to be interesting. They need it to be honest. They need it to contain things that are confusing and scary and weird, because that's how they learn to navigate a confusing and scary and weird world. The Intertidal Zone, that little educational comic he created for his students, contained anthropomorphic sea creatures that made jokes and had personalities and engaged with each other in ways that reflected real marine biology. It wasn't sanitized. It was accurate. It was honest about the weirdness of underwater life. And when those characters evolved into SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, Mr. Krabs, and the rest of the Bikini Bottom cast, they brought that honesty with them. SpongeBob SquarePants is, at its deepest level, a show about the beautiful strangeness of the natural world. A world where a sponge can be a fry cook, and a starfish can be a best friend, and a crab can run a restaurant, and a squirrel can live underwater in a glass dome. The absurdity is the accuracy. The ocean is that weird, and the show trusts its audience to meet it there. Every ban, every cut, every censored scene chips away at that trust. Not catastrophically, not all at once, but incrementally, piece by piece. The complete vision gets reduced to something more manageable, more predictable, more safe. And safety, while it has its place, is not what makes art endure. What makes art endure is the willingness to be honest about the full range of human experience, including the parts that make corporations uncomfortable. I want to spend a moment talking about the voice actors, because they deserve more than I've given them so far, and their relationship to the censorship conversation is important. Tom Kenny has been voicing SpongeBob since the 1997 pilot, 29 years. He was there when Hillenberg first pitched the show. He was there when the uncensored takes for Sailor Mouth were recorded. He was there when Hillenberg got sick, and he was there when Hillenberg died. And he's still there now, still showing up every week, still giving SpongeBob the same infectious, almost painfully optimistic energy that defined the character from the beginning. Kenny has spoken publicly about the uncensored Sailor Mouth cut with a kind of conspiratorial glee. He clearly enjoys the fact that there's a version out there where SpongeBob is actually swearing. But he's also been careful to note that the censored version is the real version, that the dolphin chirps aren't just covering up bad words, they are the joke. The censorship is the comedy. Without the dolphin noises, Sailor Mouth is just an episode about cursing. With them, it's an episode about the absurdity of censorship itself. The form and the content are inseparable, and that's something I want to sit with for a second, because I think it applies to the broader conversation. The best censorship, the censorship that actually works artistically, is the censorship that the creator controls. Hillenberg chose to censor the swear words with dolphin noises. He made the censorship part of the art. And the result is better than either version would have been alone. Better than an uncensored episode where characters just swear, and better than a censored episode where characters say darn and heck. But the censorship imposed from outside, the network pulling episodes, cutting scenes, rearranging content, doesn't work this way. External censorship doesn't become part of the art, it just diminishes it. The just one bite without the gasoline scene is a lesser version of the episode. SpongeBob in Random Land without Red Mist Squidward is a lesser version of the episode. The loss isn't fatal. Both episodes still work, but something is missing. A layer of meaning, a moment of audacity, a flash of the specific, personal, irreducibly individual creative impulse that made the show special. Bill Fagerbakke, who has voiced Patrick Star since the beginning, once described the recording process as the most fun you can have without breaking the law. And I think that captures something essential about the spirit of the show, and by extension, about what's lost when episodes are censored or removed. The show was made by people who were having a genuinely great time, who were laughing so hard that Tom Kenny had to lie on the floor of the sound booth, who were drawing storyboards with hidden jokes and background details that they knew most people would never notice, who were making a show that was, at every level, a labor of joy. And joy is fragile. It's easy to undermine. One corporate decision, one standards and practices ruling, one bad headline, and a scene that was created in a state of unguarded creative delight gets stripped from the record. The joy that went into making it doesn't survive the removal. What survives is the absence, the gap in the episode, the missing segment that longtime fans can feel even if new viewers can't. There's a detail from Hillenberg's personal life that I keep returning to. During some summers after finishing high school, he worked as a fry cook at a fast food seafood restaurant in Maine. That job inspired SpongeBob's occupation. The creator of the most beloved animated series of the 21st century based his main character's job on his own experience as a teenage fry cook. There's something so perfect about that. So specific and human and real. It's the opposite of corporate storytelling. It's not a focus-grouped character trait designed to appeal to demographics. It's a guy who flipped burgers one summer and thought, what if a sponge did this? That specificity, that human, personal, irreducibly individual creative impulse, is what the censorship machine cannot accommodate. Because specificity is messy. It doesn't fit into clean categories. A panty raid scene that is simultaneously a joke about aging, a satire of masculine desperation, and a tender observation about childhood nostalgia cannot be reduced to inappropriate content for young viewers. But that's how the system processes it. And so the system fails, not because it's malicious, but because it's incapable of seeing art the way art is meant to be seen, whole. I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I keep coming back to the same image. It's from Midlife Crustation. Mr. Krabs is lying in his childhood bedroom at the end of the episode. His mother has grounded him. SpongeBob has apologized and left. And Mr. Krabs is looking around this small room from his past. And he says something to the effect of, being here makes him feel younger. It's the quietest joke in the episode, and it's the one that matters most. Because the whole time, he was chasing youth through bigger, louder, more transgressive acts. The partying, the arcade, the panty raid, and the thing that actually makes him feel young is something as small and private as lying in his childhood bed. That's the scene Nickelodeon doesn't want you to see. A crab, alone in a small room, feeling something complicated and real. And the fact that they removed it tells you everything about the gap between what this show is and what the network wants it to be. There's one more thing I want to mention before we close out, and it's about the uncensored versions. Because here's the truth that I think the fans already know, but that needs to be said out loud. The banned content still exists. Midlife Crustation is on DVD box sets that were sold for years. Just One Bite with the gasoline scene is on international broadcasts. Sailor Mouth has an uncensored cut somewhere in Nickelodeon's archives. The Red Mist, Squidward scene from SpongeBob in Random Land, was captured by fans before it was replaced. Every piece of banned SpongeBob content has been preserved by the community. And that means the bans aren't really about preventing access. They're about controlling the narrative. They're about Nickelodeon being able to say, we don't endorse this content. We've reviewed our standards and made changes. We're responsible. Whether you can actually find the content elsewhere is beside the point. The point is that the official record is clean. And there's something almost poetic about that, isn't there? The network cleans the record, and the fans preserve the mess. The institution imposes order, and the community maintains chaos. SpongeBob, the character, not the show, would understand this dynamic perfectly. He's a creature of chaos. He lives in a pineapple. He catches jellyfish for fun. He has no sense of social boundaries. He is, fundamentally, the antithesis of institutional control. And the fact that his show keeps generating content that institutions want to control is, in a way, the most SpongeBob thing about SpongeBob. I think about Hillenberg's nightmare, the SpongeBob doll washing up on the beach. He was afraid of what his creation would become once it left his hands. And in a way, the banned episodes are exactly what he feared. Not because the content is harmful, but because the act of banning them proves that the show is no longer the thing he made. It's a product now, a franchise, a revenue stream with standards and practices attached, and the moments that made it feel alive, the moments that took risks, that trusted the audience, that lived in the uncomfortable space between children's entertainment and something deeper. Those are the moments being quietly erased. But here's what gives me hope, and I want to end on this, because I think it's important. The show's best moments are unkillable. You can pull Midlife Crustation from every streaming platform on the planet, and people will still quote it. You can cut the gasoline scene from Just One Bite, and fans will still share the deleted version in 4K upscales. You can replace Red Mist Squidward with Baby Squidward, and the original scene will live forever on fan sites and Discord servers and Reddit threads. The art persists. It persists because it was made with care, with love, with the specific human touch that no corporate decision can replicate or erase. Steven Hillenberg made something that matters. He made something that millions of people carry with them, not as a product or a franchise, but as a memory, a language, a way of seeing the world. The banned episodes are part of that something, and as long as there are fans who remember them, who share them, who talk about them at 2 a.m. on YouTube, the bans don't win. The art does. And honestly, I don't know what the answer is. I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I still don't know. Should Nickelodeon restore midlife crustation to streaming? Probably. Is there a legitimate argument for keeping certain content away from very young children? Sure. Does it matter more that the art is preserved in its original form, or that the brand is protected from controversy? I don't know. I genuinely don't. What I do know is this. The fact that we're still talking about these episodes, the fact that fans are still sharing them, debating them, petitioning for them, means that the art is winning. The network can pull episodes from its platforms, but it can't pull them from people's memories. It can cut scenes, but it can't cut the conversation about why they were cut. And in the end, the conversation might be more important than the content itself. Because every time someone asks, why was this episode banned? They're really asking, who gets to decide what I'm allowed to see? And that's a question worth sitting with. I think there's also something worth saying about the way these conversations happen. Because the SpongeBob fan community doesn't just passively consume the show, they engage with it critically, thoughtfully, and with a depth of knowledge that would put most media scholars to shame. The fan forums, the wikis, the Discord servers, the YouTube commentators, these are communities of genuine analysts. They track production codes. They compare international airings frame by frame. They document every storyboard revision, every cut scene, every animation error. They've built a more comprehensive archive of SpongeBob SquarePants creative history than Nickelodeon itself has ever made publicly available. And when those communities push back against censorship decisions, they're not just expressing nostalgia. They're making arguments. They're providing context. They're doing the work that standards and practices should be doing, but isn't. The work of actually engaging with the content on its own terms, rather than reducing it to the most uncharitable possible summary. The fan community's response to midlife crustation being pulled wasn't just bring it back. It was bring it back. And here's why the panty raid is the punchline, not the point. Here's why the moral of the episode is actually conservative, not transgressive. Here's why this episode is a better teaching tool about the foolishness of inappropriate behavior than any PSA Nickelodeon has ever produced. That's sophisticated media criticism. And the fact that it comes from a community of people who love a cartoon about a sea sponge doesn't make it less valid. If anything, it makes it more so, because these are the people who know the show best, who have the most context, and who have the most at stake in its preservation. If you've made it this far, you already know this wasn't a light video. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If you're lying in bed right now, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a cartoon crab in a childhood bedroom, I hope you sleep well. And if you can't sleep, well, that's what the next video is for. Thank you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd really love to have you along for whatever comes next. Good night. Good.